So please welcome the Most Reverend Archbishop of Miami, Thomas Wenski.
And welcome, Cardinal Collins. Isn't the weather here in Miami wonderful? I like to tell people that Miami is a wonderful place, and the best thing about Miami is that it is so close to the United States. And you can drink the water without fear. Well, let me get on to my talk now. And of course, as you know, there's a lot of talk about the crisis of vocations to the priesthood. And here in the United States, as you well know, we are rightly concerned, given that our priests are aging and ordinations continue to be admittedly too few. Here in the Archdiocese of Miami, we have a goodly number of priests serving as pastors who are over 70 years of age and several over the age of 80. Thank God for them, but we do scratch our heads and ask who will step into their shoes. This is the question that keeps bishops up late at night. Although here in the Archdiocese of Miami, I can take some holy pride in the fact that there are almost 60 young men studying to be priests for the service of the Archdiocese of Miami. And they are a very diverse group, and so they look like the people here in the Archdiocese of Miami. But it'll take about 10 years from start to finish for these 60 to become priests. And so in 10 years we might have close to 60, because not all of them will persevere. But those 70 or 80-year-olds that are serving today will be long out to pasture by then. So while the number of seminarians has grown here in Miami, we cannot deny that there is a crisis. And why? Well, young Americans today, many of whom have suffered the consequences of the divorce of their parents, fear making any long-term commitments. And this fear of assuming risk in the face of an apparently uncertain future also accounts for the contemporary crisis in marriage today. We have a vocation crisis in the priesthood, but we have a vocation crisis in marriage today. Yes. In the West, North America and Western Europe, young people caught in a culture of instant gratification and fleeting interest are in no rush to marry, much less to enter a seminary or a convent. Today, in the United States, there are more adults not married or no longer married than there are married people. Wow. So yes, I do have a Harley Davidson. And it's a spam call. But as I said, there are more adults not married in this country or no longer married than there are married adults. And so we're not lacking seminarians because young people are rushing off to get married. But don't let the statistics scare or discourage you. On a global level, the total number of seminarians is higher than it was in 1978. And that's called in many areas the John Paul II effect. Yes. During the almost 27 years of his pontificate, he inspired many young people to embrace their vocation to the priesthood or consecrated life. And many young priests today who are enthusiastic about being priests and serve with integrity describe themselves as JP2 priests. And many of these priests and religious sisters will tell you that they discovered their vocation at a World Youth Day. And that World Youth Day was a creation of Pope St. John Paul II. And St. John Paul II said in Novo Millennio Innoente, a exhortation he wrote at the beginning of the new millennium of this century. He wrote, and I quote, "Young people, whatever their possible ambiguities, have a profound longing for those genuine values which find their fullness in Christ. If Christ is presented to young people as he really is, they experience him as an answer that is convincing, and they can accept his message, even when it is demanding and bears the mark of the cross." End of quote. A superficial knowledge of Christ, the fruit of an inadequate or faulty religious formation, is a formidable obstacle to fostering vocations. If people do not know Christ, they will not know to follow him. They will not hear his invitation to follow him. So whatever can foster in children and young people the authentic discovery of the person of Jesus Christ and of the vital relationship with him will be beneficial to awakening vocations. World Youth Days, as I said, on a global level, has done just that. And at World Youth Days, the popes, John Paul, Benedict, and now Francis, do present Jesus Christ as he really is. And if we do that, then our young people will be able to experience Jesus as an answer that is convincing. Of course, we know that there are many vocations in Poland. They're beginning to drop off, but Poland has given us many vocations. One out of every 6 priests in the world is Polish. And of course, there are many, many vocations in Africa and in India. And these are all hopeful signs. And what would we do without those foreign priests who come here to America to serve us? But it is also a challenge to us who live in what is called the West, where the number of vocations has yet to significantly grow, to do more and to do better. And as I say, I use the word grow deliberately, for vocations must be cultivated if numbers are to grow. And this is a task for the entire Christian community. Once in a while, I get a letter from some parishioner complaining about their priest's accent. Sometimes even Cuban Americans will write me complaining about a priest's accent because his English is poor and they want to hear him speak Spanish well, but they want to hear him speak in English well for their kids. I usually write them back, telling them to be patient with the priest. But sometimes I've been tempted to write, and I have written something along these lines. Ma'am, think of this priest's parents who allowed him to leave home, to go off to the seminary, and to become a missionary in a far distant land, just to serve you Why? Because when your kids were young, and if they mentioned that they were thinking about the priesthood or religious life, you said to them, "No way." We have to get the parents back on board. Despite the conventional wisdom to the contrary, the priest shortage is not the result of celibacy. It comes out of a crisis of faith and the closing of the window of man's mind to infinity or to transcendence that we see in this ascendant secularism of our age. The desire to become a priest is nourished essentially from intimacy with the Lord in a really personal relationship. And if you have that personal relationship, you will also have the desire to be with Him, to spend time with Him. Priests should not only invite young men to consider a vocation to priesthood, and just like we got to get the parents back on board, we got to get the priests back on board. Sometimes when you interview a young seminarian and say, what took you so long to decide? You know, a surprising answer has been, nobody has ever asked me before. So we got to get the parents back on board. We also get the priests in the parishes back on board to pose the question to young people. And those priests should be able to attract these young people by their own priestly integrity and joy. And at the same time, teachers in our Catholic schools and your everyday Catholic should encourage vocations. When you see, or any Catholic sees, a particularly promising young person, you should feel empowered to approach him and to encourage him or her to think about dedicating their lives to God's service. I remember when I was a young boy, an altar server at my home parish in Lake Worth, Florida. There were a couple little ladies, we used to call them the flapper girls because that's what they looked like. They were still dressed in the clothes of the 1930s. And, you know, they always had rouge under this and everything like that. But it always stopped me in the church at the daily mass and say, you gotta be a priest. And it always encouraged me. So we have to encourage young people and challenge them to think about it. Young people, whether in our parishes, campus ministries, schools, or religious education programs, they can and they will respond to God. Because God does not fail to call, and He is not outdone in generosity. They will be able to overcome their possible ambiguities, and they'll overcome those ambiguities with that confidence that Christian hope inspires in us. If all of us, members of Christ's faithful, continue to support the ordained ministry of our priests, and if all of us support the young by introducing them to a personal and real relationship with Christ, a relationship that is nurtured with a solid catechesis and a sacramental life, we will overcome the crisis of vocations, not only to the priesthood, but to sacramental married life as well. So thank you very much for